I always find it interesting when I come across people that have backgrounds that are similar to mine and have found their own ways of moving past those backgrounds. And so today I'm talking with Zach Stone. Zach, I met as a substance counselor, substance abuse counselor, and clinical supervisor. And after talking with him and hearing his experiences, and we both grew up roughly in the 90s in the rave scene, um, going to these raves, experiencing rave life, which usually involved a lot of different types of drugs, music, all that fun stuff, right? And so to see and hear Zach's experience from the DJ side, and then finding his way through alcohol, substance abuse to his version of sobriety, was very beautiful. And so today's conversation, we're going to talk about his journey, but also one of the things I love right now is the different approaches to quote unquote sobriety. And it's not always that abstinence is a requirement. So part of what Zach does is Zach might help somebody find their responsible relationship with a substance, whether it's alcohol, cannabis, things like that. Not always saying that abstaining from it might be the best thing, right? But maybe sometimes we can find a relationship with. So today we're going to talk about creating healthy relationships with medicines, understanding the stories that you have within yourself, and how those stories sometimes lead us towards the medicines or the substances that we abuse. Um, Zach is an amazing human being. I really love this conversation. I think we need to have more open conversations about different approaches to abstinence, to sobriety, to just finding different ways to approach the medicines that you choose to involve in your life. Hope you get something out of the conversation. We'll see you on the other side. But first, this message. No matter how much we prepare, the holidays tend to stress us out. So this year, take a moment to reset and recenter with a grounding retreat in Costa Rica. Join Jeff Hawkins, Steve Wimmer, Cameron Nagashima, and myself, Adam Reel, for a one-week immersive yoga retreat at Blue Osa Resort, backed up to miles of pristine beach. Every day you'll have an option to experience yoga, meditation, relaxation, self-discovery, adventures, or your own personal free time. This is a time to build your peaceful practices before you need them. Take this time for yourself. Visit GarudaWellness.com for details. We have pricing options available, and if you pay in full by July 1st, you receive a 20% discount. Through the experiences offered, there's a lot of different ways to build your practice and approach this retreat. Take time to create space for yourself so you can hold space for others. Reset and recenter. Visit GarudaWellness.com for more information. That's Garuda, Garuda, Wellness, WELLNESS.com. GarudaWellness.com. And now an uninterrupted podcast with Zach Stone. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I'm sitting across from Zach Stone. So I met Zach at a festival last summer. A return guest, Cameron Nagashima, has been on a number of times, was hosting this event. And so Zach was DJing, I was doing sound stuff. We all met. Zach's a great dude. So Zach is a substance abuse counselor, clinical supervisor at Badr Recovery. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about, Zach's journey. Zach actually has a really cool journey that is one of the reasons I was kind of drawn to his story. We're similar in ages, in the 40-ish range, similar-ish backgrounds, grew up in the club scenes. Zach was the DJ. I was the attender of DJs, different regions of the world. And it's just, I think it's really important to understand, as we've gotten older in years and as we've maybe removed some substances from our lives that might have fueled the reason to go to these clubs and to experience these musics. There's also a big healing energy that happens from being around big groups of people, moving in unison, feeling the vibrations, feeling the energies, right? You don't need the substances, or you can find different substances that maybe work better with your body, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But there's still like a beauty in that connectiveness. And as somebody that grew up in the rave scene in the 90s, like going to these like underground fucking industrial complexes, you got to get a flyer from a friend, from a friend, from a friend, and like you show up and all you do is follow the drum and bass until you find the lights and you're like, fucking hell, here we go, right? It's such a cool experience, right? The whole idea, there's something special about that, and obviously, it's I shouldn't say obviously, but for some of us, we got caught in a little too deep,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
a little too deep in the
absolutely.
scenes.
Most of us, I'd say.
Yeah, man. But there was like a romanticism around it, right?
Hmm.
I grew up
There
in
was a
Texas, like,
goodness in it. There was
yeah,
goodness in it.
I never felt that connected.
Yeah.
Like to have, and I know we're all just starting off on a tangent. This is kind of how we roll, but here we go.
Yeah.
But looking back at some of those rave experiences and being like I grew up as an awkward kid. I was a fat kid. I had friends, but I didn't really feel like I fit in until I went to these raves. And like, granted, like we're face full of drugs. We're like, out of our minds in some sort of way. But to feel like all of a sudden, like some random human just come up and just like embrace you with love.
Yeah.
And like, this is so like gonna date myself, but throw like a bumble baby on your head, and feel that vibration start moving around in whatever ecstasy you're in or on or LSD or whatever. And it's like, there's such a beautiful like experience with that, right? And I'm not saying like that we need, but there's a connectiveness, right?
Yeah.
So
The one that I didn't had any experience or awareness that even existed until you walked. Until I walked into a rave the first time.
what age was that for you?
It was about 15.
Okay.
The first rave I attended. Yeah.
So 90s, early 90s, somewhere in there.
Early 90s, 93 probably.
Okay.
94, somewhere around there. Yeah.
And was that in this Washington area, or where were you at? Okay.
Yeah, South Seattle warehouse space.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to move from the attendee to the DJ and to the like, I'm going to do this. This is fucking dope.
Pretty quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess this is part of my healing journey. So maybe we can just go there.
Dive in.
So yeah, I'd say my healing journey, a little bit of background. I grew up without my father. My mother left my father when I was probably 1.
Okay.
And so it was just my mother and my sister. And my mother worked for Alaska Airlines, so we moved all the time growing up. I didn't stay anywhere for, Arizona prior to moving to Seattle. I lived there for 4 years, but other than that, it was every year we seemed to be moving.
Okay.
And so, I never had that like strong group of friends growing up. A little bit of a, I wouldn't say loner. I had my sister, but moved to Seattle when I was 11, and adolescence hit, and I think me growing up without my father really affected me around age 11, 12.
That would have been like the early 90s here in Seattle. Late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And that was a tough time for Seattle. Like, Seattle was not a booming town at that point.
No.
It was like a submerged fishing town almost. Like, it was kind of like downtrodden. There wasn't like the .coms here yet.
No.
Like, none of that. Grunge was just barely getting there,
Was opening up,
Yeah. So that was a tough time to be in Seattle at that decade.
Yeah, and the outcasts were the skaters, and so there was also an early childhood experience that I experienced around age 11 that, in hindsight, really negatively affected me.
Okay.
Created a lot of shame, a lot of self-hatred, a lot of just this internal, like if there was a part of me that felt like I was a monster. And this experience was something I shoved away. Okay. Obviously, it wasn't. It was too much for my brain to even go there. So in hindsight, that was a lot of the driving factor of me starting my healing journey. Of like, something broke.
Right.
And I didn't know it at the time, but in hindsight, it became very clear. So that traumatic experience happened. The issues around my father not being there, all was happening. So I was a troubled teen at that point.
Yeah. With plenty of opportunity to find trouble in Seattle.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm a latchkey kid too, so I had a lot of free time to do what I wanted. And I'd say I got in with some wrong crowds at an early age. I started speed metal was what I was into prior to the rave scene. I was in my first speed metal band at age 14.
Yeah.
And
were you playing guitar? Or were you
playing guitar and lead singer?
Okay.
Mostly lead screamer.
Lead screamer.
Yeah. And so I was really into speed metal prior to finding the rave scene. I had a friend who was in the rave scene, a friend I grew up and went to junior high school with, and he kept trying to take me to one of these raves. I'm like, ah, no, dancing is no,
Right.
so not me. I'm not, no, fuck that.
Yep.
But eventually he talked me into it, and I went to my first rave, like I said, in South Seattle, and I just remember walking into that environment, and I see all these hippie kids having a fucking blast and like dancing and not giving a shit. And I remember to this day just being like, I want that.
Yeah.
I need that. That's and from there I was hooked. I was like, this is this. It was just my environment from that point on. So there was some transition. I was still in a band, but then I ended up getting way too wasted on drugs to even be a member of this band anymore.
Okay.
Methamphetamine became
Right.
part of the ritual. And
It's hard to scream on meth. I mean, not in a melodic way.
yeah,
You know?
no, yeah, not
Shit.
the two worlds completely clashed.
Yeah.
And so I got kicked out of the band because I was strung out on meth, and had a 2-year struggle with methamphetamine.
Okay.
Just sort of home. I moved out of my house when I was 15. My mother was having such problems with me, and did the whole survival camp thing with me too.
Oh, really? Okay.
It helped for a minute, but
Yeah.
And I'll just say a little bit about that. I had a fantastic experience at the survival camp. I know a lot of people don't, but
I've heard a few mixed reviews, and I'd not heard of that until I moved up to this area. So I don't think that's a down south thing or like a nationwide thing, but I've heard a bit of mixed reviews from the survival camps up here.
Yeah, it was a fantastic experience for me, but it didn't change the dynamic I was in at that age. It did taught me a lot about radical self-reliance and stuff like that, which ended up being really important later in life. But
so it planted some seeds that might not have germinated at the time, but
right.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I started mixing music when I was using meth and hanging out with other people that were using meth, and it was just all about going to the raves and partying, and I was homeless but selling drugs, so it didn't matter, and just having a great time until I wasn't. Right. Until I found myself.
Until it doesn't.
Found myself at an after-hours party, strung out, no place to go. What the fuck am I doing? I also remember being very discouraged at that time because it seemed like all the DJs that were performing were also high on meth. So it's like you go into this environment that's all connective and beautiful, and then the ugly underbelly became very apparent, and it was just disgusting to me. I was like, what the fuck am I doing? And so right around the same time, at this after-hours party that I'm talking about, I met my friend Jared Lovejoy. To go by Jared Harler, and he owned or was part owner of Tasty Shows, which was a predominant production company at the time. We were doing big shows like The Roots, and when Bill Clinton came in, they helped with setting up the green room for that, and the Fugees and Pearl Jam, all these big shows. And that morning when I met Jared, he had told me that he had just produced a Pearl Jam show the night before and had this big wad of cash from the show. And I was sitting there doodling, and it wasn't my own artwork. I was like going over somebody else's artwork, all pie, just doodling.
Yeah.
And Jared's gay, and he obviously was hitting on me at first.
Yeah.
And he sees this artwork that I'm doing, and he was like, "Oh, I own this production company. This art looks great. We'd love to have some of your art on our flyers." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, cool." Just playing it off.
Yeah.
Anyways, we ended up hanging out all morning. He immediately, there was brotherly love immediately from this man. And he, I explained him my story and my situation, and he took me off the streets. He gave me a place to live while I detoxed off methamphetamine, and for about a week, he'd come in and get me up and take me on walks and feed me and do all the healing things. And after I detoxed for about a week off meth, he took me up to Orcas Island to Dobay for a 10-day retreat with him and his friends, all his friends he worked with. And I went up there and had this just amazingly healing experience, had this amazing mushroom experience with
Wow.
them. And when we got back from that, he gave me a job at his production company, sort of as, you know, the poster guy, put up posters and help with the day of production type stuff.
Okay.
And fast forward a couple years, it was in 1996 that Jared funded the first club night that I produced, which was 360 BPM. It was the first 18 and over drum and bass night in Seattle. It was a club vinylized.
Okay.
And that is where my DJing really took off. You know, prior to that, it was just figuring it out. But
Yeah.
my premiere was sort of doing this club night. And it was at that time drum and bass was just starting to show up in Seattle, so there was a lot of energy behind it. And given that I was into speed metal prior, when I heard drum and bass, it was just like click.
It landed right in there with you.
Completely clicked.
Yeah.
And I just submerged myself in that genre. It was interesting at the time because the house heads in the rave community hated us. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember. Yeah, drum and bass and house were like very antithesis of each other.
Yeah, there was like a complete separation in the scene at that time, which, you know, I can understand from their perspective, because it was no longer about plur necessarily, peace, love, unity, and respect. It was about, you know, raging and crazy sounds and aggressiveness and kind of the opposite of plur.
Yep.
Although, you know, we were still there.
It was still,
loving.
Exactly.
And there was still community there. But
you know, it's funny you mentioned that, because like I was at a rave one time. I think it was like 97, 98 in it was in Houston, and I remember I think it was like. It was almost like the era when the hatred or the animosity between the house heads and the drum and bass cats like kind of dissolved. And so I was at a rave, and it was you know, traditional warehouse, you know, all that bullshit, right? But DJ Shadow was playing, and at that time Shadow was like more into that house music, right? And I didn't know who he was at the time. And I was sitting around in one of those circles in between sets, you know, I'll just love circles and shit, people just loving on each other. And there was this guy over in the corner that just kept saying, like, you know, the traditional, like, you know, stoner, you know, out of his mind kind of thing. It's like, I'm knocking on the doors of perception, and I don't know what's going to happen if it opens. And I'm like, dude, open the door, shut the fuck up. Like, I'm tired of listening to you talk like this. And then next thing I know, DJ Shadow up on stage. And I'm like, oh, that's that asshole that was just over here, like, knocking on the doors of perception.
Oh, really?
Like, fucking hell. But at that rave, it was DJ Shadow doing his house shit. And then right after that, I can't remember the DJ. Maybe, no, it's Paul Oakenfold was there, but he was more house at the time. Anyway, some other drum and bass DJ came out, and then Raekwon and Ghostface.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy fuck, holy shit. Like, okay, nobody has any shit to say anymore. Like, you have Wu-Tang members up here with house DJs and drum and bass DJs. Like, we're all just going to do this together now. This is fucking fantastic.
Yeah, I remember that happening here in Seattle. It was around, like, the early 2000s. And, you know, during that time, I started working at Platinum Records.
Okay.
As the drum and bass buyer.
Oh, cool.
And fantastic. It was great. I absolutely loved it. And I think that's sort of, I at least in part, when the divide started happening, because I was you know, all these house guys was coming in the record shop and getting to know me, and me getting to know them, and I started to become friends with these guys. And then you start seeing them at drum and bass events, and then I'd start going out to house events, and it was the early 2000s.
Yeah,
I think that started happening. So yeah, anyways, started working with Tasty Shows. You know, there was still a lot of maladaptive behaviors. I wasn't using meth anymore.
Okay.
But I had a lot of, you know, once again in hindsight, a lot of sexual repression that really wreaked havoc on all my relationships. You know, every partner that I'd ever been with, up until actually my recent partner, who I've now been with for 10 years, I had cheated on.
Okay.
And so I would say out of all of the addictions, sex addiction was probably the one that hit me the hardest.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
definitely was.
Was
And
that like kind of a surprise to you? Do you think that why it hit you the hardest is because it was a surprise? Did you like see it coming, or was it like, fuck, man, I guess this is an addiction too?
um, I, I mean, I guess I guess I didn't realize how that it was dangerous at first. I just, felt like I was a sexually charged
Right.
human being.
Yeah.
But once again, I had this thing that occurred at 11. I would anytime it would come into my psyche, I'd completely block it out. Which, in hindsight, it was the damaging moment
Mm.
for, at least in large part, damaging moment for my sexuality and these reasons I was repressing these feelings and the repressed feelings were coming out in all these maladaptive ways.
Right.
Um, and yeah, mostly sexually. But there was also issues with, sex and cocaine and mixing, the sort of the two addictions together.
Right.
It created a whole other thing. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it was pretty ugly. I lived in the closet about I'm bisexual.
Okay.
And it was something that in the drum and bass scene was an absolutely no.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in Seattle, but all of the drum and bass producers at the time were coming from UK.
Okay.
And a lot of them were sort of steeped in Jamaican tradition and Rastafarian,
Okay.
and so there was a lot of homophobia.
So hard no on that.
Yeah,
Don't
so
even
like
cross the
I
lines.
couldn't express any of that. I felt
Wow.
like I couldn't express any of that. And not to mention just society in general at
Yeah.
that time was not open to that. And so that was mixed in to it too.
So finally found an art form where you can feel like you're accepted and you can
Right.
be creative, but then the supporting community was like, cool, but you still have this box we need you to
Yeah,
fit into.
yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, if I would have maybe if the trauma wasn't a part of the equation at that point, I would have had the courage
Right.
to just be myself in that environment still, like regardless of what was going on. But it was stacked. It was things were stacked against me in that
Right.
way.
Yeah.
So I put on a mask, like most of us do.
Yep.
Until we don't.
Yep.
And so I wore this mask for a really long time, and I thought I was happy, but after continuously cheating on my girlfriends, and then I eventually found this woman and I married her around 28 years old.
Okay.
And I thought I was done. Thought I'd found the woman. I'm gonna marry her. Got out behind. My 20s are out of the way almost. I'm done being dumb.
Right. Get out of my system.
And I was married to her for 9 years, and towards the end of our relationship, I cheated on her.
Okay.
And we had all sorts of other issues in our relationship, but that ugly thing came back. This need to feel validation was really at the core of it. And
Right.
when I wasn't getting the validation that I needed in my relationship, I was just going to go seek it elsewhere, and
Right.
that's what I did. And at this point, I had already had a 3-year-old daughter, and I had a 1-year-old daughter when this happened. Like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
What the fuck is wrong with me? And at this time, I went. My friend Jared, who took me off the streets when I was 19, he lived on Orcas Island still, and I went up there to visit him because I had this heavy thing I was contending with, and he's like my guru, 10 years older than me friend, who's always going to be there for me. And I explained to him what had happened, and I was like, I don't know why I keep doing this, and he gave me some really amazing advice that I continue to share to this day with my clients that have questions that are unanswered. He said, ask the universe, say it out loud with intention.
Yeah.
And he says, I promise you, like a stone being dropped into a serene lake, the ripples will eventually come back to shore and you'll get your answer. And so me trusting this person as much as I did that. And sure enough, later, about 3 months later, I was sitting on my back porch smoking a spliff, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was just like, oh, that's why.
Wow.
And, this is something that I definitely had no plans of ever talking with anybody about.
Right.
um, much less, think about it in my own mind. But once that download came through, it was like, fuck, well, now what? How am I supposed to deal with this?
Yeah.
And I, given I'd grown up in the rave scene and I had a lot of experience with recreational psychedelic use, and, it had taught me a lot. It had created a lot of opening in my life up until that point. I had a lot of trust, in particular with LSD.
Okay.
And so here I am contending with this really heavy thing. I didn't know what else to do. I called one of my best friends and I said, "Hey, I'm dealing with something really heavy. Can you sit with me while I take some LSD and hopefully work on this?
Yeah.
And see what happens." And so he agreed. Went over to his house. He was living with his wife, who was also a really good friend of mine. And I took all the LSD in the house, and probably 3 different kinds. I don't know, it was a copious amount. It was just like, to fix me. And I had never had this experience on LSD. And, prior to that, I had taken it maybe a couple hundred times, right? Like, it had been many times that I had taken this, but I'd never had this experience of, I was in the room with my friends, albeit just filled with anxiety, just fear and like, ugh.
Yeah.
And I left the room that I was in with them, and I went into this this internal space that I call the womb.
Okay.
And I've been there twice, and this was the second time I had been there. So the first time was on this amazing DMT experience where I met Mother Earth, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But this time, when I was taken into this womb, it was red fleshy walls, and felt extreme amount of safety in this space, and I recognized it immediately because I had been there on a prior experience with DMT. And so here I am in the womb, and I hear what I can only consider my higher self tell me, "You don't have to hold on to this anymore. This isn't serving you.
Right.
I'm giving you permission to let this go." And in that moment, well, I should also preface this by saying, like, 2 or 3 weeks prior to this experience, I had this shoulder back pain that was really intense. So I go into the experience with that. So I'm in the womb. I get this message from my higher self, God, spirit, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And in that same moment, I saw this ancient wheel appear in the womb with me that was static. It wasn't moving, and it was broken. So it wasn't a full circle. It was like someone cut the top of the circle and like separated a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Right?
It's like chunk missing from it.
Yeah. Well, not even a chunk missing from it. It was just like cut and then offset.
Okay.
And it wasn't moving initially, but as I hear this message from myself, the wheel comes back together again and starts to move forward. And as it moves forward, I come out of the vision with my arm stretched out, and the pain that I had in my back completely shot out of my fingertips and was entirely gone. I mean, not a hint of it was still there. And I came out of this experience and this vision or whatever, the womb, blown away.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit. I just healed myself from inside myself, not only physically, but emotionally.
Right.
And I felt so strong and empowered in that moment.
Wow.
And it was with that strength that it was a natural, I was just ready to sit down with my 2 friends and talk about every detail of the trauma.
Integrate.
Yeah. And it was a rough night, it was just wailing, I call it on your knees moment, right? Like I felt everything. I felt all the shame. I felt all of it in that whole night of just being in it and feeling it. And, I was completely washed out at the end of the night. I was venturing into like, how I had treated my ex-wife, and I know that she had struggled with early childhood trauma, and like how I was a part of that. And it was just so many layers of accountability and humility.
Right. Yeah.
And, after that experience, I knew better. Obviously, I think all of us, when we have one of these really intense psychedelic experiences, is we question, is that real? Did that really happen?
Right. Try to rationalize it or...
or just like I just took a drug. Am I fooling myself?
Right.
Yep.
So
So I sought out therapy. Actually, I think I was already seeing my therapist. Yeah, I was already seeing my therapist. So continued with my therapy, just to like really dive into that and make sure that what happened actually was real. But
Yeah.
I mean, to this day, and this was in my early mid 30s that this happened.
Okay.
I'm 47, almost 48 now. To this day, when I talk about it, I get chills,
Yeah.
and honest, it worked. It
Yeah.
worked. I finally was able to look myself. That was one of the things. I could never look myself in the mirror and genuinely tell myself I love myself.
Right.
And after that experience, that's when it all changed.
Wow. I don't know if you know this, and I just, within the past, maybe decade, I read about this, but Bill W., the founder of AA, the basis for his program started with a hero's dose of acid.
Yep.
And you would
Yep.
take that, and then you would see God or have your moment, your womb experience like you, but very unique to you, what you need to understand why you have a reason to live.
Yes.
And then from there, the steps manifested, right? And that's that integration.
Yeah.
But then, Tim Leary, Ram Dass came along in the 50s, 60s, and were like, hey, everybody should be on acid.
Yeah.
Freak some people out.
Yeah.
Bill W. had to reassess, do away with the acid side, and just go with the steps.
Can you imagine how things would be so different if you were able to continue working
It's
with that?
so crazy,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because just hearing you talk about your journey, I'm kind of relating it to myself in my own ways, and growing up, in those '90s club scenes and just taking hallucinogenics like they were candy. I don't remember having those like very impactful like God moments like I have now, but also I do feel like there was a layer of like there something was keeping me safe at those moments, right? Even the shit that I got myself into, the precariousness, the drugs, the alcohol, the abuse, like all that shit that happened from it, there was still like there was a level of safety that I felt, and I not then, but looking back, like I could look back and be like, man, something was watching out for me, whether it's God, spirit, whatever it is, right? The spirit of the molecule that I was taking was like, hey, we're gonna hold you in safety because you're gonna get to some weird places, but may not understand it now, but in the future, this is gonna help, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't know, man. It's so hard because like we'll get to a place of, let's say, sobriety in our life, or removing a substance from our life that had been a problem, and this is grain of salt, right? Because everybody has their own experiences, but there was a reason that thing was there, and there was a lot of quote unquote good that probably happened from the bad, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of the people that I work with now in the energy work are going through some kind of recovery of some substance, multiple substances, sexual abuse, anything like that. And what I'm finding is that a lot of these folks are way more open and aware than anybody would ever understand because of the stuff that they've put into their bodies and the walls they've knocked down.
Right.
And that can be very jarring for the person that is on the receiving end of that, because it's like, I don't have a filter.
Yeah.
I see spirits all over the place, and I hear voices, and I don't know what the fuck is going on.
Right.
Okay, now let's try to like work into some boundaries. Let's work into some systems so you can understand and manage this.
Right.
But like also, high five, man. You've broken down some cool barriers. Now let's figure out how to manage those, right? And so, I think there is a reason why, some of us have gone through this horrible kind of experience to get to this like understanding that there's a glimpse, there's a glimmer of light, there's a hope, right? And you got to kind of like taste the darkness, and to know how toxic it is and how hard it is to walk away from that. But to choose to turn around and be like, no, okay, I know you're there and I know how good you feel, but there's something out there that's harder for me to attain, but feels way better.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I would say I've sort of landed on, there's a lot of talk now that psychedelics are going to come on for therapy. And understandably, the concern or the safety concerns around it. I mean, these are strong medicines. And I know when I was a kid, we didn't have any elders to tell us how to do these things.
No.
So it was just throwing something on a wall and see if it'll stick. And oftentimes it didn't. And
how much of it.
Right. Yeah. And so I understand the concern about just sort of people using it outside of a therapeutic environment. But I will say if I wouldn't have had if I wouldn't have had the experiences with recreational use prior to me actually having something to contend with, I wouldn't have had the courage to take the LSD that I did and
Right.
have that happen. So I think that is one positive thing about recreational use. At
Yeah.
least in my case, it was
Yeah.
because it takes a lot of courage to take those heroic
Yes.
doses, and you're not just going to go from 0 to 100, right? Like there's an
Incremental.
introduction that needs to occur.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
And so, I guess in your work now, like helping people in recovery and substance abuse, things like that, do you get some kind of like, whether it's some clients you're working with or maybe, when you get together with fellow practitioners and talk about, some of the approaches, are there side eyes about like, okay, we're trying to get people off of substances. Why are you
Oh yeah.
introducing a substance
Oh
into
yeah.
them? Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of pushback against that.
Yeah.
And even just people I work with, you know, given my main addiction to sex,
Right.
sex is, I mean, no one's going to tell you don't ever have sex again.
Never. Yeah.
And I mean, that would be, that would be silly
Yeah.
to expect someone to do in a program. So in that case, you to contend with it, you have to get underneath it all.
Right.
And that's, given I've lived that experience and I know it's possible, then it's not, to me, it's not about the substance, right?
Right.
It's what is underneath that, and that's the thing to address. The substance is just a substance. And it's just a relationship to a thing. But yeah, I mean, I even get pushback from some of the people that'll come in expecting it to be this, everyone's abstaining from everything.
Right.
And I don't have that approach. I don't see that. It's a person by person basis, and obviously, depending on who you are and what the scenario is, abstinence can either be important for a lifetime or for a period of time.
Right.
But my message that I try to convey is, I try to empower the people I work with to let them know you can get to the bottom of this.
Right.
In most cases. Sometimes it's just about maintenance.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, I think people can, if they're willing to do that deep work, to really get to that underlying problem. But yeah, it definitely gets some pushback.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoy those
Yeah.
conversations,
I love those
engaging
conversations.
in
Yeah.
that
Totally.
to bring a different viewpoint and approach.
Yep. Now, conversely, do you get people that are coming to seek your help that are like, don't care what you got to say, just throw some hallucinogenics at me. Let's just do this, right?
No. So that's the other thing that I really appreciate and sort of I see my role as is I see my role as being a connector to the world of therapeutic psychedelic use and the sort of the default world, the people that don't have access to these things, right? I grew up in an environment where everyone's used to it and everyone has access to it, and it's just, a normal thing.
Right.
But I want to help people who didn't grow up in the rave scene and didn't have access to it, and sort of create that bridge.
Yeah.
For me, is really, really, that's where I see myself. I think that's really important work right now.
Yeah, I think and it's good to be able to approach people where they're at.
Yeah.
With it's about 3 years ago in Washington, and I think they've backtracked a little bit, but plant medicines were decriminalized, right? And I think again like backtrack, but it's not like a legal backtrack. It's just like there's some laws put around it, but it's still like they don't give a shit. Different types of substances that work for different types of things, right? Let's just pivot to there real quick. There's an ayahuasca type medicine called ibogaine. Have you heard of that? Okay, it's really good for opioid addictions, right?
Yeah.
There's like strong uses for combining 5-MeO-DMT with ibogaine for helping with extreme cases of PTSD for like people with like special ops, PTSD and stuff like that. So is your practice kind of like moving? Do you focus mainly on people trying to rid themselves of recovery through psychedelics,
No,
or is that
no.
just a layer of what you offer?
That is a direction that I continue to move forward
Okay.
in, but I don't want to break any rules,
Right.
and so I've it's sort of bubbling underneath the surface.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about it
Yeah.
with people, explore. What I was going to say, going back to the people that I tend to work with that are don't usually have access to these things. They're some of them never even engaged in any psychedelic use.
Right.
So it's a conversation that we have, and in most cases, and I share my story with most people that I work with, if it comes up in a therapeutic way.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, because psychedelics aren't legally able to be used right now, I try to breath work, right? I
Yep.
try to help people as much as I can with the tools that are currently available.
Right.
And I have found that breath work, for me, takes me to the exact same place as psychedelic
Totally.
does.
Yeah.
And so I really heavily rely on that. But also, with the understanding that psychedelics are about to come online, we're about to be able to use these, sort of when they are, this
Right.
could help if it's still an issue. I am convinced that through yoga and breath work, we can take care of everything.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's a great message too. Like
Yeah.
sometimes we do need some like big help. Like I call it
Yeah.
the spiritual crowbar. Sometimes
Yeah,
we need to break
yeah.
that spiritual crowbar out, move those fucking boulders, right?
Yeah.
But you can do all this shit with what you're born with,
Yep.
right? You can do light therapy, you can do
Yep.
breath therapy, you can do meditation. Like you can do all this stuff, but
Yep.
again, sometimes you need the things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually remembered what I was going to say real quick before I forget
for it.
again. So on the meeting the human with where they're at, which you were saying earlier, I have a friend named Leo Russell that's been on the show a few times, but she was one of the big proponents for the legalization or the decriminalization of plant medicines. And the way she approached it was fucking amazing. It was so much work on her end to do this, but it paid off. And what she did was she created two societies in Seattle. One is the Entheogen Society. And entheogen is like a Latin word for expanding mind or something like that, right? And so it's like that fancy word that we've put on hallucinogenics to, legitimize, just give a different name,
Yeah,
right?
make it scientific.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so a lot of the people that participate in that community understand that word, right? So Entheogen Society, it's all like Alex Gray artwork and shit like that.
I have a sticker above my DJ setup.
Oh, there you go. Hell yeah.
So,
Well, so the other company she created or foundation she created was called the Adapt Society, and I can't remember the acronym for Adapt. And so there was no mention of entheogens. It was
Right.
all scientific
Right.
studies. There was no fractal artwork. It was all very like blue collar, just like very black and white kind of shit, right? Information, links, cited all this stuff.
Yeah.
But in her doing that, she appeased both sides of the
love that.
coin, right? The
love
people that needed that staunch,
Yep.
I need legal representation, I need like fucking facts, I need all this shit. And then you have the other one that's all like Alex Gray testimonials and like,
Hippy-dippy.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
But because of that, she was able to convince enough people that, you know what, let's give this a fucking shot, right?
Yeah.
And let's decriminalize it and just see where it goes from there.
That's great.
Yeah.
I am excited that, especially given the tumultuous, left-right situation that we're in right now, that psychedelics is definitely something that I believe we're gonna both be able to get behind and bring us closer together. I've thought that forever.
Yeah. Well, that's, kind of like the empowering the human idea, right?
Yeah.
It's like every human has the right to be happy, right? And every human's happiness is self-defined, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really kind of getting into the understanding of like what truly does make you happy,
Right.
and how can we empower you with that? Because like for me, I thought I knew happiness. I thought I had happiness. I was going a corporate route. I was checking boxes. I was doing like the family thing. I had the promotions and the insurance and all the KPI shit. But I was fucking like if I really sat down and like took the alcohol and the substances away from my life, I was fucking miserable. And I was climbing every ladder that I was told I needed to climb, and theoretically successfully.
Right.
But I wasn't supported. I wasn't happy, and it wasn't until like I was able to remove the substance from my life that was the demon was alcohol.
Yeah.
Now, alcohol was something that I never really found a way to responsibly manage in my life. And I was drinking from pretty much 18 until I quit drinking at 38. Every single day I was drunk. And I wasn't like obliterated drunk, blackout drunk, like, and I used to qualify that as like saying I'm not an alcoholic. I
Right.
pay my bills. I'm not,
Right. Yeah.
I'm not an abandoned dad. I can
Yeah.
do all this shit. But when I really sat down, it's like, when was the last time you actually spent a sober moment with your child?
Right.
It's been a long fucking time,
Right.
right? Oh, yeah,
Right.
maybe you are a shitty dad. And then
Right.
then the stories and all
Yeah.
that shit come from there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, so removing that from my life was a huge thing for me. But then at the same time, like as I was removing that, I reintroduced cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And I had quit smoking weed, I think when my first daughter was born at 24. And so like literally as I'm pushing alcohol out of my life, I'm bringing this thing back into my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very conflicted with it because I'm like, dude, no, just no, leave
Mm-hmm.
that alone. You're already clearing your mind with this shit. But it almost felt like it was supporting me in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really big mind fuck for me to get my head wrapped around that, and I was hesitant to talk about it in public. This is way before I was starting my own like holding space for clients or sound bath stuff. I was still in restaurants, all that shit. But yeah, it was just a big mental battle,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of us that deal with that, like, and even talking with people now that being in the yoga community, there's a lot of people in sobriety in some kind of way. Like people will come up to me and knowing that I've gotten rid of alcohol, but think that it, I'm so inspired by your sobriety,
Right.
and I've got to make sure I say at that time I'm not sober.
Right.
Like I have medicines that I use on a
Right.
regular basis. I microdose,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I sit with cannabis,
Mm-hmm.
right? Hoppe, there are medicines that I sit with on a regular
Mm-hmm.
basis. It's just not alcohol,
Yeah.
right? And that's the intoxicant that was the one that was demonizing
Yeah.
me, right?
Yeah. Totally.
So, I still support myself in different ways, right? And I think it's important like people understand like there's ways you can support your own humanity without getting lost in the support.
Yeah,
You
no,
know?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I work with a lot of people who, say have an issue with alcohol and sort of do that transition to cannabis, and I support that.
Yeah.
I almost, let's take away the really hard drugs like fentanyl and meth, but especially when it comes to cannabis, it's or even some antidepressants. Like sometimes we need a teddy bear, right? And it's a safety thing.
Right.
And I think it's sort of cruel to force somebody. Nope, you can't have that teddy bear right now.
Right. Yeah.
Nope, you're not. Nope, you got to be sober. You got to abstain from everything.
Right.
And it's like, once again, going back to the humanity of it, it's like no one's going to change until they're ready to change, and there's barriers to change. So what are those barriers? That's
Yeah.
what we need to focus on, and it's not about abstinence.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
What are the barriers to living a happy life and
Yeah.
feeling living authentically?
So with where you're at now, abstinence is not being a requirement.
No, well, yeah. I mean, I work. So I was talking to you earlier about this. I work at a smaller agency.
Uh-huh.
It's just me and the owner, who's the other counselor there. She's amazing, Jessica Rhodes. Who's a yoga instructor and very into alternative healing and very much on the same page as me.
Yeah.
But we do work with mandated people, and it's a challenge. We do have the benefit of being able to choose who we work with. So it's not some corporate, Lakeside Milam where it's a bunch of numbers, and if you work there, you get someone sent to you and you have to work with them, right?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
I don't think I could ever work at a place like that. So I get to choose who I work with. So outside of people that are mandated to come to me,
Yep.
I don't require people to abstain. When they're obviously majority of the people that we do work with are self-admit. I think currently there's probably 65 to 70% people at our agency that are self-admit, and with those, it's holding space for them and exploring different things and getting them to come to their own conclusion about what they need to do and how they
Right.
want to do it. So yeah, I work with a lot of people who even just like people will come in uh, recognizing, say, their alcohol use has gone a little overboard and
Mm-hmm.
creating issues in their life, but they don't want to stop drinking alcohol. They want to try to change their negative relationship with it. So I'll walk people through that. You
Yeah.
know, okay, let's try this. Let's come up with a plan and see if we can do this,
Wow.
and then go from there.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a pass, great. If it's a fail, what now? What's the next thing that?
Yeah.
What's the other agreements that need to be made? And
Yeah.
you know, sometimes they work through this process, and at the end of it, are like, yeah, I can't drink.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's like, no, that was successful.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously it's a lot of talking about underlying issues in most of these cases.
I think, what really pings me with your approach right now is like you're helping them manage their own ego.
Yeah.
And our ego, like we hear people talk about a lot, kill the ego, all this shit, right? The ego needs to be part of us. It wouldn't be there if we didn't need it, right? It just doesn't need to run the show like it has been. But the ego being what it is and us understanding it, like it's if you can find a way to make your ego think that it chose the path that it's doing, fucking hooray, man,
Yeah,
because
totally.
you've just conquered it, right?
Yeah,
The
exactly.
ego wants to feel like it's in charge,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So if you can like grab the ego's hand and like walk it, but think it's the one leading the
in
path,
control, yeah.
and through that talk therapy
true.
and through that just like that unpacking, they start to my old boss used to call it the Socratic method, right? You just ask probing questions, right? You're trying to clarify, get them to clarify their own stance, right? And through that, they basically champion themselves of
Yeah.
like, oh, I figured out my problem.
Yeah.
I know why I can or can't drink now.
Yeah,
Like, this is
yeah.
fucking great.
Yeah.
And I think when the ego can find that journey itself, then we can find a way to responsibly do it if we want to, right? Because it's like that abstinence, it creates such a negative story.
It does.
In your body, in your mind, and
Yeah.
then how you project it onto others,
Yes,
right?
oh.
It's like, oh, you drink still. Oh
Right.
my God, that's so bad for you.
Right.
Do you realize? But you know
Right.
what? Maybe it's good for them. Like, the baby boomer generations where we hear the stories of like great grandparents smoking and cigars and drinking whiskey until the day they died at like 99, had no cancer, no cirrhosis, none of that shit. They didn't have the stories back then
Yeah.
to say like, this is bad for you. You
Yeah.
shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
It's like they
Yeah.
just did what they did.
Yeah.
So I think there's a layer of that. Like,
Yeah.
like we guilt ourselves into these things
Yeah.
because we see that happen to somebody else, or we've had that experience happen in our family dynamic. So we
Yeah.
can never step towards this or whatever. But
Yeah.
you're a completely different human with physiology that's very unique to you,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I find a lot of having to combat that mentality in my work. A lot of people I work with have gone to residential programs, sometimes many times, or other outpatient programs, and they're taught this particular, sort of 12-step thing,
Right.
And abstinence is it's the number one important thing.
Yep.
And I guess I kind of like the challenge in having that conversation and showing them maybe a different, a more empowered approach. Like, this is on your terms. I say to them, through my experience of healing, I think the holy grail of healing is really truly recognizing your specific important place in the universe.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
That's like the holy grail. If we can get there, then, at least in my experience, once I got there and really embraced that and recognized that space, then you recognize the responsibility that you have to hold that space.
Right.
And how important that is to everything else. And once you recognize that is a responsibility that you have, that becomes way more important than anything else.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And it is hard, especially without being able to use psychedelics that can just ram through that trauma.
Right.
So I try to really work with breath and help people really understand the power and importance of that sacred medicine.
Right. Yeah.
And
Well, I think one of the things that really kind of impacts me about the work you're doing is that you're meeting people on an individual level, right? There's a book I read just recently called The End of Averages. It's a fantastic book, and it talks about a lot of different aspects of life, but one of the impactful ones for me it talked about was in the 1870s, the United States started using averages as a basis of humanity, right? So, but at that time, we wanted to be average, right? But over what we found is like nobody can be average, right? There's studies that they cite about fighter pilots, and they took all the average fighter pilots, heights, weights, 19 qualifiers, nose to fucking index finger ratios, all this shit, designed a cockpit, and they're like, cool, all right, this fits every average fighter pilot. It fit nobody. Out of the 4,000 fighter pilots they had, it didn't fit a single fucking person because nobody fit all of those qualifiers, right?
Totally.
And so we've been going through life and just like saying, okay, this is average. This works for the average human being. Cool. Let's just throw this at them. Like healing processes, AA programs, all this shit. None of it's not, I mean, and it does have its work, right?
Yeah,
it does work for some people, but it's not a broad brushstroke thing, and I think now we're getting to a point to where we have enough people in the world, we have enough modalities in the world that we can look and say, Zach, how can I help Zach?
Right.
Not how can I help Zach, Adam, Robin, fucking Monica, all these people. It's like, no, I want to help Zach right now, right? And design a modality and an approach that's going to help that human being.
Yeah.
And it's so important because, like you said, like nobody can Zach like you can Zach.
Yeah.
Like we're all unique, but nobody's special, right?
Yeah.
And the uniqueness that makes you Zach and me Adam is gonna never be. It will never be replicated, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, those are those beautiful things. Like we can get out of our own way. We can get out of our own fucking substances and all of our own stories and all the shit, and we can realize the special sauce that makes Zach Zach. Has a very unique approach and offering to this humanity. That's like your actualization moment. It's one of many I'm sure you'll find throughout life, right? And those are those reasons that we're here. That's in my opinion. That's what keeps me going. It's like, oh shit, I found a way to take the microscopic understanding that I have of quantum physics, and I still try my hardest to try to understand, but have no understanding of. Music I've been a part of for decades that I didn't know what to do with, right? Now I'm doing chanting. I don't know where the fuck that came from. Energy work. Okay, let's figure that out, right? But it all packages together in something that I could offer humanity that has seemed to help some people. It's like, wow, okay, cool. Like, found my reason for being right now. Like, that's fucking cool, man.
Yeah, and a cognitive, I was thinking about this the other day. I can't remember why this came to me. I think I was in session with somebody, but I was thinking how like you have like the entrepreneur who has all these businesses, is creating all these jobs for people and has all this money, and then you have like the janitor, right, who's just doing his job, and it's equivalent to like algae in the ocean versus like a lion living on land that's sort of like this powerful thing, but they're equally as important, right? And I think that's a lot of what we run into in the therapeutic setting is this people comparing with other people, and it's futile, right? Like, and there's no reason to do that. So I think that's part of it. It's like, yes, this is my place in the universe, and it's equally as important as the entrepreneur or whatever. In the Vipassana meditation technique or tradition, and it's funny because they don't tell you this till afterwards. It's like, hey, go sit for 10 days in silence, and then we'll give you some instructions afterwards. Beautiful experience. But one of the things that they talk about afterwards about the reason why it's silent is that if you're meditating for 10 days, so 10 days straight, 11 hours a day, you get breaks here and there, but like you're in it, man. Hips, back, mind, knees, everything's aching in your body from a cognitive level to a physical level. You have 2 meals a day, you've walking paths, and you're just in your own shit. But after they're done, after we can finally talk, they say, one of the reasons why we have a silent meditation is we don't want you to think you're doing it wrong. Like if I sit there for 11 hours and after I'm done, fucking Joe sitting in front of me is like, dude, I just got done talking to God for 11 hours. Like it was so beautiful and magical and everything. And I'm like, man, my fucking knees hurt. This is bullshit. I've been doing this wrong this whole time, right? We get in that story in our head. But if you're there for 10 days, no talking, no guidance, no like, hey, you're doing this right, you're doing this wrong.
you find your own way through that shit.
Yeah.
You work your way through your own demons, your own fucking shit, right? And
Yeah.
you understand that your path is unique to you.
Right.
Maybe you didn't see God. Maybe you didn't talk to God. Maybe you experienced God,
Yeah.
right? Maybe you felt God in a
Mm-hmm.
different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can shut our minds down enough, we can experience that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's that big message is like, stop comparing ourselves to
Yeah.
other people,
Yeah.
right? You are a very unique
Yeah.
individual,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. People don't recognize the power that they have. I
yeah,
mean, at least, I think especially in Western society,
yeah,
even the importance of breath. Like, I didn't understand how important breath was
right.
until my first ayahuasca ceremony, and the 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 purging that I experienced in that session. I had to breathe a particular way to contend with the violent purging, and
Yeah.
it wasn't a scary experience. It was just very intense.
Yeah.
And but yeah, after that experience, I'm like, whoa, like breath is everything.
Yeah.
More challenging, I'm sure.
Yeah. So where's your so where's this taking you? Where's this leading you in the next few years for yourself?
Yeah, so I think, when we met this last summer, I think I spoke to this, and just earlier today, like, I co-parent my two daughters, and I have them 50% of the time, and my youngest daughter's got a learning disability, so I spend a lot of time just, my number one is being a dad. So that's always first and foremost. With my extra time, it's working in my career, and it's, I started working as a counselor in 2018. I guess that's also part of my, if we were to go back to my healing journey, after I was able to talk about this trauma. My wife, I had already separated from my wife because I had told her that I cheated on her, so we were separated. And then when this trauma thing came about, it was like I felt like I needed to explain to her the why, and it was a big risk that I was going to take in telling her this.
Yeah.
But to me, being able to allowing anyone to look into my soul, especially someone I was so intimately tied to, was really important to me. So I'm like, just do it.
No matter what happens.
No matter what happens, this is what's best. And so I did. And it didn't make things better, right? It definitely makes things worse.
Yeah.
So she was done. She was done with me at that point.
Okay.
And about 5 months later, I lost my job. I was working at a company called Rain Corporation, and we were a DJ mixer manufacturer. And I had been working there for 9 years, and the company got sold just because we were the last U.S. manufacturer, and the cost of manufacturing was way more than what it was in China. So eventually sort of got...
The economics of it just took over.
Exactly. And it was really sad because it was I loved that working for that company, and it fit right into the whole, music environment that I grew up in. And it was pretty traumatic. Yeah. I did have the opportunity to go back to school because I was a product specialist at Rain, and there was no other company in the area that even remotely had a similar position.
Yeah.
So I was able to go back to school, have the government pay for that, was on unemployment for the 2 years I was in school. And it was a great opportunity. But I had this crisis of like, okay, I'm no longer working in the music industry. I know I don't want to go back to DJing 4 times a week to make ends meet. I had 2 kids by this point.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a thing. And I had to do this deep soul searching of like what is it that, why am I drawn to music? And it was obvious, once again, in hindsight, getting involved with that was about healing myself first and foremost. And once I started DJing and performing and sort of being the symphony orchestrator of the environment, and recognizing how I was helping other people heal in this environment. So it was about healing, always about healing. And so with the help of my current partner, sort of analyzing all this, it was just obvious. It was a logical progression, right? And I knew I wanted to work with psychedelics, given they had such an impact on my healing process. So went to school, graduated, started working with Jessica at Badra in 2018, and it's taken me a while to learn, to completely change careers and like learn the ins and outs of how to be a counselor and how to show up and how to create the boundaries that need to be created. And so I'd say within this last year, I've like arrived, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, I know how to do this. And it's for me now, it's still just about networking and creating the team
Mm.
of people, yourself included, to parse my clients out to.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
And that's super important.
Yeah.
It's not just about going to the 12 steps and being abstinent. Like, how can we help you connect to your body and your breath and your
Right.
spirit? But assimilating that team, as you know, is super important.
Yeah.
Because anybody I send someone to, I need to like deeply trust.
Right.
And that's not something that's done through a phone call.
Yeah, right. That's experiential
Yeah,
stuff.
you have to hang. So I recognize this is going to take a long time, which I'm perfectly okay with.
Yeah.
I'm having to practice a lot of patience in this time.
Yep.
So just a slow trajectory towards manifesting that network of people. And like I said, just I see myself as the connector to the default world.
Yeah.
Bringing people in that wouldn't normally have experience or access to it, and helping that demographic.
Are you surprised at how many transferable skills you have from your previous life that really lend to what you're doing now? That might have seemed like toxic traits at the time that are like now they're like, well, it's like I'm so happy I learned that thing that seemed like such a horrible thing that I had to get rid of, and now it's like, oh, that's a tool in my arsenal now.
Yeah,
fucking awesome, man.
Well, you spoke to it earlier, like the suffering that we go through is a gift, and I tell that to everybody I work with too. Like,
integrate your trauma.
Yeah, I mean it's a gift when it's all when you're through it. You look back and you're like, holy shit, I'm so thankful for the suffering that I've endured. Yeah, and the lessons that it's taught me, invaluable, especially when you're holding space for someone else's pain.
Yeah.
It's essential.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So, and it's, the job's really quite easy. It's just simply holding space.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, it's funny you mentioned that. I have camp coming on in a couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about what that means.
Yeah.
What it means to hold space. Yeah. Like we hear it a lot. I
do that for a group topic sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's interesting to know and to feel and to understand what that means, because when you might not realize it. Maybe it's a word or a phrase you hear and you're like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But you know it when you feel it.
Yeah.
Like when somebody holds space for you and you're like, oh my God, like I feel so safe to just explore now.
And connected and not alone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. God, that's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Well, man, I'm so honored to be in that circle with you, man. I'm so honored, man. I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom. Where can we find you?
You can find me. Social media I've made a choice to not really be active in social media. But if anyone, if anyone's out there that, is struggling with addiction or any other maladaptive, behavior, and if they would like to work with me, then contact me at bodgerrecovery.com. It can be found there. Yeah, I think that's awesome. About it. But yeah, if anyone is looking for a 12-step alternative, non-judgmental space that really is open and focuses on non-traditional modalities of healing, then please hit me up.
Awesome.
I'm there to help.
And we'll have links for all the ways to get in touch with you in our show notes. So.
Okay.
Zach, thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you too. Thanks for having me on, Adam.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
All right.
Thank you so much for talking with Zach and I. Please check out the show notes for ways to get in touch with Zach, to support him, or to book a session. Also, ways you can support the show. Obeisance and love. We'll see y'all next time.